Good evening, everyone. We're going to just wait a few moments until everyone gets to join us. We have quite a few people who are going to be joining us today, so we're going to just make sure that everybody's Zoom works, because it's a new piece of technology, I think, for some people. So we'll just give that a second. As we're waiting for people to populate in, I'll just give you a little bit of an orientation to Zoom. On the top of your screen, there should be a little bit of a toolbar. If you move your mouse over, there's a little bit of a toolbar that you can see. And on the far right corner, if you click the three buttons, three little dots that says more at the top, you'll see a chat option. So I'll make a little bit of a note. And so you can put questions or comments. I won't really be checking questions or comments until kind of the end of the session, but here you can put questions here. I'll just say hello to everybody. So again, for those of you just joining us, we're just taking a couple moments to wait for people to join the call. We have a number of people who are joining us this evening. A little bit of an orientation to Zoom if this is your first time. Largely, I'll be speaking. We have a few other moderators. Sa, Zoe, and Ming Chang will be joining us from the Spark Prep team in Hanoi. There is a chat option at the top of the Zoom toolbar. So if you scroll your mouse over to what should be the top, there is a three little dots at the far right corner of the toolbar. It says more. And if you click on that, on the very top of that, there's a little bit of a chat option. And if you click chat, then there's a little chat box that will pop up, and we can use that for questions and answers. I'll get started here in a minute. It'll probably be useful because I'm going to be sharing my screen. It'll probably be useful if everyone has something to write with, maybe a notebook or a piece of paper and a pen, just so you're not necessarily having to toggle back and forth between the slideshow and whatever you're using for notes. So we'll just give it one other moment and then we will get started. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, we have about 30 people on the call now, which is lovely. I hope everyone is having a pleasant evening. We'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you all for joining us. I know that these are uncommon times and uncertain times. I hope everyone is taking an opportunity to take care of yourselves, to stay in touch with your community digitally, to rest as much as you need. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today on a topic that's very important to me, and it's also a complicated topic. I'll do my best to cover as much today as I can. It's difficult to cover everything about how to build a school list in about an hour, so I'm just going to touch on kind of the primary topics and walk you through how Spark Prep thinks about building a school list. The details can get quite a bit deeper, quite a bit more nuanced. And I think the thing to remember is that this takes time. It's not necessarily a thing that you're going to learn overnight, but day after day, week after week, you'll get familiar with it. You'll get familiar with how to understand schools, understand school offerings, and kind of build that into a practice for yourself so that by the time you do have a school list, it feels like one that you've really vetted carefully yourself, been able to really engage with, and that you feel like it reflects exactly what your goals are. Okay, so we'll get started officially. My name is Luke Taylor. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Spark Prep. I'm speaking to you today from my home in San Francisco. And today we're going to be talking about the topic of how to build a school list. I'm joined today by Chiha, Sa, and I think Zoe from the Spark Prep team there in Ho Chi Minh City and in Hanoi, respectively. And they'll be moderating a little bit of the chat in Zoom, and we'll use that for questions at the end of the session. We'll go for about an hour today. I'll do my best to stay focused, and hopefully we'll have some time to answer some questions for you at the end. So I want to start today by understanding how we think about colleges, college applications. I use this graph a lot. Spark Prep uses this graph a lot because I think it is um, relevant to how we think about college in general, and how we think about college in general is very relevant to how we think about college fit and building a school list. Fit is one of the biggest questions that we talk about because it's kind of not very well understood. Does fit just have to do with SAT scores? Does fit just have to do with major? Does fit just have to do with the kind of network that a school has? And in fact, it's kind of all of those things. So you can think of fit as having to do with each aspect of who you are as a person, right? And as a person, as a high school student, you're coming primarily from an education background in classes. And those things, you can kind of break them down into your grades and how your transcript has gone over the last couple of years of your high school. You can also break it down in terms of your activities, and that might have to do with leadership and things you've been committed to, things that you feel passionate about. And that might also have to do with your test scores or your recommendation letters. So all the different aspects of who you are as a student and how that relates to your goals for college will give you a sense of how we think about fit. So you can break this down into a few different components of a college education, right? So college education is not just academics. In the United States, college is thought of primarily as a kind of a community endeavor. Learning is a collective activity. Of course, you're studying your specific major, you're taking your specific classes, but you're learning from the experiences of others. You're learning from the experience of professors. You're working in group projects. It's a very collaborative, very community-focused experience. And so when we think about aspects of a college education, some of the things we want to consider are, of course, academics. That's at the first that's at the top of everyone's mind, I think. And academics, you can break down a little bit even further. We can think about majors. Majors may be the thing that you get your degree in. Minors may be an additional area of study that you just do because you enjoy. I majored in something called comparative studies in race and ethnicity, and I had a minor in Japanese, or my area of study, my additional area of study was in Japanese. Some schools offer what are called dual degrees or combined degree programs. So if you're working on your bachelor's degree and you know that you want to continue into a master's program or a graduate program, you can sometimes add that on. So that's something maybe you want to consider when looking at schools. Do they offer dual degrees or combined degrees? You might also want to think about what are the areas of study? What are the different departments? What does your school focus on? Even if you're a science or STEM focused student, do you want to have broad access to the humanities or social sciences? And then, of course, research. Research tends to be a really big defining feature for some schools and universities. And we'll talk about the difference between universities and liberal arts colleges in a moment. In addition to the actual academics, you also want to think about the academic experience. And the experience is like, how is that material delivered to you over the course of your 4 years, your freshman year, your sophomore year, your junior year, and your senior year? Some schools take a lot of care and a lot of attention in designing a curriculum very carefully. Sometimes the first year, your freshman year, is a carefully curated experience with specific courses to make sure that you know how to write very well, that you know how to research very well, that you know how to develop and craft and defend arguments carefully. And some schools will say, no, we think that students can direct their own education themselves. We don't need to really impose a curriculum on them. That's usually called an open curriculum, and then kind of everything in the middle. So the difference, we kind of think about 3 different phases. We think about an open curriculum, which is no requirements except for what your major requires. A core curriculum usually is a set of experiences that maybe every student has to take, and then breaking it down into what we think of as requirements. Sometimes they're called general education requirements, distribution requirements. Every school will call them a little bit different. And usually what those are making sure that maybe every student takes a math class, or every student takes a hard science class, or every student takes a social science class before they graduate. Many schools will design this quite differently, but that's one area of how the academic experience is delivered. Sometimes schools will develop seminars. Those are usually small discussion-based classes specifically for a group of students, freshman seminars on like a particular topic. And so it's a very intimate discussion-based time. I took a really great seminar my freshman year on the history of women in music, because I'm a big music person, and it was really just an incredible class. There were 8 of us with a music professor from the music school, and I just learned so much about the history of women making music. It was called Women Making Music. It was a wonderful class. So seminars, specifically designed classes for a particular population, summer courses, summer experiences, freshman experiences or sophomore experiences, honors, dissertation, those can all be a part of the academic experience. Then we can also talk about how that experience is delivered. Sometimes we think about that in the student-faculty ratio. Sometimes we think about that is it discussion-based? Are there lots of lectures? What's the class size? Those are some things to consider in terms of academic experience. Sometimes we also want to think about resources. Do schools have grants, financial aid, centers, and affiliations? When we talk about grants, sometimes that's for supporting undergraduate research. And of course, I added research at the end here. When I talk about centers and affiliations, I mean, have they invested in a center that looks at like human-centered design, or have they invested in a center that looks at public policy research, or do they have a center that looks at race and poverty and dynamics in the United States? Many schools will have what are called centers, and centers can be thought of as kind of research hubs, where sometimes visiting professors, visiting faculty will come and do research. They often hold a lot of events. So resources are a way of thinking about how does the university support the overall experience of students and faculty? And you have to remember that universities and colleges, well, universities primarily, are sometimes first and foremost research institutions. Their job is to forward knowledge in the world, right? One of their priorities is teaching, but that's not the only priority for universities, at least. So thinking about how the school thinks of itself is potentially useful in understanding fit for yourself. Then there are some kind of the practical or logistic considerations, like size, like location. Size we kind of break down usually into 3 categories: small, medium, and large. Small is anywhere around 3,000 students or fewer. Medium is anywhere around like 7,000 or 8,000 students or fewer, and then large can kind of be anywhere up to like 30,000 students. Usually most large schools will be around like 13,000, 14,000 students. And then we think about location: urban, suburban, rural. Urban means it's in a city. Suburban means it's kind of like around a city or near one. And then rural means there's lots of cows. Then we also think about kind of like areas of the country. Now, you might not necessarily be familiar with the difference between New England as a geography and the West Coast as a geography, but sometimes people think about considerations like weather, and some people like really want snow and some people don't want snow. But these are reasonable considerations for you to think about. Then we want to talk about things like student culture. Student culture is one of the trickier things to try and figure out if you can't visit a campus. But some things we might look at are sports. How big is sports? At some of these larger schools that have like 15, 20, 30,000 students, sports can be a very, very large part of the culture. It can be very, very central to the school community. Sometimes they play what are called Division I sports: football, basketball, volleyball, swimming. Sometimes schools have like really strong arts offerings and arts traditions. Maybe you're not an artist, but you want to be surrounded by artists because you think that that is a good contribution. Or maybe you want to try some art. And then we also think about things like tradition. What are ways that the school develops a sense of community not just for the students who are there, but ongoingly for the alumni community. Then we also want to think about values. Values we'll talk a little bit about later, but this is kind of like, how does the school conceive of itself? How do they think about their own mission as educators, as centers of knowledge in the world? You can read a little bit about that in the mission section, in the values section, in the history section of websites. And then we also want to think about student life, right? So student life and activities, not everything takes place in the classroom. Classrooms are just one place where learning and development and experience takes place at universities, but sometimes we have pre-professional training, right? If you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to go into business, sometimes there are groups that really examine preparation for some of those paths. Sometimes there are academic paths, sometimes there's advising. Again, sometimes there are arts groups or arts clubs or service groups or service clubs or athletics, just to make sure that you, even if you're not going to be a professional sports person, you have access to health and fitness. Then we also want to think about support. The college experience can be very vast and it can go by very quickly. And so sometimes you want to think about what are the school's advising processes? Is there one advising center for undergraduates? Does it happen in the major department? Are there career services? Most schools have what's called a career counseling center or career development center. You can really just Google the name of the school and see career development center. It's very uncommon for schools not to have that, but it is something for you can take a look and see, well, how will this school set me up to get a job afterwards or to find internships? Usually there's an entire department or an entire center for that. Sometimes internships happen specifically through department. So if you're in an economics major or if you're a computer science major, sometimes they will have internships specifically for that department. And then we have something called co-ops, and co-ops are a way, some schools have them, many schools don't. It's a way to get professional experience, work experience as a part of your college education. It's facilitated and you get course credit for actually working. And then, of course, the last thing I think is personal development and community. And the reason I end there is because I think it's really important for you as a student, as you're looking at colleges, to imagine for yourself, why am I going to college? What do I want to get out of it? What do I want to get out of it? At the end of 4 years of study, and again, you have to think about it in time, at the end of freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, how do I want to be different? What skills do I want to acquire? How do I want to be prepared? What kind of person do I want to be? And that's kind of beyond academics. That has to do with how you want to be developing as a person and how the community at any particular school will help shape you. There's not necessarily an easy way to look and see how a school will do that, but for you to know and write that down as a goal is really useful. So the reason I share each of those different aspects of a college education are because I think they pretty perfectly correlate to some of the things that you should be thinking about regarding your goals, right? And you want to be, while you're looking at your college list or doing your college research, you should be refining your goals. So first, I would suggest looking at your goals, writing them down: academics, community, skills, experiences, etc. All the things that we just talked about. Write those down as clearly as you can. If you don't have the answer to them, that's totally fine. College is certainly about exploring, certainly about finding out some of those answers. So you don't have to know everything all at once, but you want to have a little bit of a map. What are the things I do know and what are the things I still have questions about? And then as you're doing your school research, some of those answers maybe become clear, or some of them maybe will come into question again. So it's a little bit of a back and forth between the research you're doing and the goals that you have clearly articulated for yourself. You should be able to tell by now that this is not necessarily a quick process. This is something you want to do gradually. It's something you want to do regularly. You want to kind of fold it into your day-to-day experience and work with it as a practice. It'll take some time. The beginning is a little bit more challenging, but you'll get used to it. So how do we get familiar with colleges, right? If you're starting from scratch, what are some of the ways that we can come to understand different college offerings? Well, the first thing, of course, is you got to do your research, right? And as I was saying, research is a practice of yours. You're going to be doing it. I recommend our students kind of do these 15-minute sprints, and I'll show you a 15-minute sprint in a moment, to get familiar with 4 or 5 schools, get familiar with how schools kind of lay out their content, and then kind of iterate. One of the challenges, and I have to apologize in advance, is that every school is a little bit different. There's no single way that a school formalizes or conforms to a set of conventions, other than you start and you get a degree. Everything in between can be pretty different. So you want to have some reference points for yourself to see how you're comparing apples to apples rather than apples to a lamp. So do your research. Here are some of the tools that you can use. Obviously, school websites. And I'm going to break it down for you to how to think about school websites, because they can be really vast, really complicated. Some of them are really beautifully designed and easy to navigate. Some of them, not so much. Virtual tours, increasingly, schools are investing a lot of energy into making sure that their virtual tours are excellent. I recommend a lot of them. Virtual tours are a way for you to literally walk around campus while someone is telling you about campus. Usually it's a recording, and so you can kind of get a feeling of like, is it beautiful? Do I like the setting? Do I like the layout? What could I see myself here? Social media, Instagram, obviously, Facebook, blogs, YouTube channels, looking at lots of videos. Sometimes I'll post introduction videos. Sometimes I'll talk about different experiences. This is a way for you to really kind of see the people and see how they articulate themselves. And then there's sometimes online informational sessions. They're going to be doing, I think, a lot more of these. Spark Prep has some information about organized online sessions. There was one last weekend. There will be more, and we'll continue to post about those. You also want to understand kind of the landscape. And here I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between universities and liberal arts colleges. There's really only one defining feature between liberal arts colleges and universities. Other than that, they're pretty diverse. The main one is that colleges focus on undergraduate education. You can think about it that way. When we talk about liberal arts colleges, usually what we mean is that the focus is on teaching undergraduates. And undergraduates are what you're going to be. When you become a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, a senior, you will be an undergraduate. And liberal arts colleges think about their job as teaching undergraduates, versus universities have additional priorities. And the main additional priority there is research, forwarding research in engineering, research in sciences, research in the humanities, research in, right? So professors there, their focus is on publishing, right? Publishing research, publishing books, publishing all sorts of different things. So teaching undergraduates is kind of one of their priorities, but they are also teaching PhD students, graduate students. Sometimes they will have medical schools, business schools, law schools. Usually liberal arts colleges will not have that. That's the easiest way that I can distinguish between liberal arts colleges and universities. Other than that, there's a lot of differences between them. The other major difference sometimes is that liberal arts colleges have a smaller student-faculty ratio. So sometimes class sizes tend to be a little bit smaller, not all the time. Sometimes universities also have class sizes that are a bit smaller. I'm not going to get into that too much, but understand that that's the major difference there. You also want to think about kind of competitiveness. Sometimes for the last many years or a couple of decades, we've talked about fit, safety, and reach schools. That tends to be a pretty tricky category, particularly for international students. Financial aid really complicates that. Basically, you can say, if you're applying for financial aid, there is no such thing as a safety school. I know that's probably difficult to hear, but that is usually the reality for international students. I'm going to show you a couple of tools when we start thinking about how to develop some fit criteria for you. But remember that the SAT ranges or averages are for students who were admitted in the past. It is not predictive of students who will be admitted. It does not talk about the likelihood of you being admitted. If you have this SAT score and this is the range, that does not mean that you are necessarily going to get in. For those of you who are accustomed to more of a Vietnamese style education, universities do not have baseline requirements in the United States where if you get this score, you go to this school. That's not really how it works in the United States. And as I mentioned, financial aid is super competitive for international students. If you're applying for financial aid, you're going to want to give yourself extra time to really craft a well-balanced list and make sure that schools, you know exactly what kind of financial aid they offer. We don't have time to get into that today just because it's a very, very long conversation. The other way to get familiar with colleges is talking to friends who attend universities. Ask them what their experience is like, or like what was surprising to them. What do they like? What do they not like? Don't say, is this a good school or is this not a good school? Because that's just one person's opinion. But you want to talk about people's experiences because they know you and they can potentially offer some insight in a way that perhaps no one else can. And then of course, working with a coach, because experience is really difficult to replicate, right? Understanding who you are, understanding what your goals are, and coaches that have worked in the admissions field for many, many years can offer, can kind of help hone and narrow the schools that you should be looking at a little bit more quickly and can help make the process a little bit more efficient and also a little bit more strategic. Oh, apparently we're going through this again. Cool, fun animation. So I want to give you an example of if I was working with a student and I had their profile, and again, remember the profile is only one way of thinking about it. How might I help them think about looking at some schools to research? And again, this is not necessarily schools that are going to go on their list, but these are schools that potentially they might be able to research. 1 second. So here's an imaginary student. This student does not exist, but perhaps they might. Student, we'll call him Kwang. This student has a 1550 on their SAT-1. That means they're in like the 97th, 98th percentile. They have 3 SAT-2s. SAT-2s are subject tests, and they're they're 750 or above. For some SAT-2s, that's an excellent score. For some, it's actually kind of below the 90th percentile, but we'll say they have 3 subject scores. Their GPA on the Vietnamese scale is a 9.2 out of 10, or maybe equivalent to a 3.9 out of 4. Their rank in their class they're in the top 5 of their class, so that's a pretty competitive ranking. In terms of activities that they've participated in, they've played a lot of classical piano, and they're also really involved in volunteer and leadership. Maybe they do some other clubs or participate in some other things, but maybe those are their primary activities that they're involved in, their passions. Academically, they're interested in game theory, which is a subset of economics, and in data science. So that's useful information for me as their coach to know, because that means I'm going to be looking for programs that fit those goals. I know that data science tends to be more of a graduate-focused degree, but increasingly schools are aware that there's a lot of demand for data science at the undergraduate level. So I'll be looking for schools that offer that kind of academic program. They have a national prize in mathematics, so I know that that helps make them slightly more of a competitive student, and their family contribution is $35,000 a year. So I know that they are looking for financial aid. Probably it's going to be need-based financial aid. Most schools don't have too much merit aid for international students. If they do, it's usually a little bit on the small side. So the 3 schools that off the bat I'm going to recommend that they begin for research, the first one is the University of Chicago. So you can see here that their SAT range in the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile is 1490 to 1570. So that means 50% of the population who was admitted last year got between a 1490 and a 1570. That also means that 25% got above a 1570. So 25% of their admitted population was 1570, 1580, 1590, or 1600. You can get a sense that's a pretty competitive landscape. And only 25% got beneath a 1490. Do we know how low it goes? Not really, but we can probably imagine that very few, if any, students were being admitted with below a 1450. This is an important range to think about. This means that, again, 75% of the population got above a 1490. That's very, very competitive, pretty competitive landscape. But it also means that Kwang's SAT is kind of right in the middle, but we can estimate probably around 60th percent, 70th percent of this SAT range. So he's sitting comfortably in terms of the admitted population from the previous year. More importantly, I know that the University of Chicago offers a Bachelor's of Arts in economics and has a data science concentration. So given his interests, that might be a school that I recommend to him. And I'm going to have him do some additional research, and I'll show you a little bit how in a moment. And of course, they offer international financial aid. That's going to be really useful for him. For Cornell, Cornell has a similar range, 1450 to 1560, and Northwestern has a 1430 to 1550. So these are all schools that are very much in his range. A little bit of change bump here or there, 10 points here or there. Cornell has 6 economics majors with more than 5 game theory courses. So while they don't have a data science program, I know that he will have a lot of economics programs to choose from. And there are 6 different majors that he might be able to choose from. And Northwestern does have a data science major. So I know that academically, this school has the offerings that Kwang might be interested in, and he's in the SAT range. Now, are these all fit schools for Kwang? No, these would all still be reach schools for Kwang, and that's because each of these schools has below a 10% admissions rate. Now, I still want him to look at these schools because I still think the programs and the experience are going to be useful, but ultimately, if he's developing a balanced list, I'm still going to have him look at a bunch of other schools. I'm going to take this opportunity, I think, is this the end? Yeah, so I'm going to pause really quickly, and I'm going to show you exactly what that research of a school might look like. Usually when I'm making, oh, hold on, looks like there are some chats. Yeah, I don't know how to turn off the video of that person. Oh, yeah, I do. Sorry, thank you. Got it. Sorry, I just got a chat about turning off someone's video, and I think we're good now. So I want to teach you how to do a 15-minute sprint of getting familiar with a school. So I'm going to imagine that we're Kwang and that we're interested in game theory and economics, and I'm going to have him look at the University of Chicago. So the very first thing that I'm going to do first is I'm going to tell him the things that he should be thinking about. Remember, we're going to go back to this aspect of the college education. So I want him to be thinking about academics. I already know that he's interested in economics, so we're going to be looking at the economics program. I know that he's interested, I want to get a sense of what the academic curriculum is. That has nothing necessarily to do with what he has told me, but I want him to see, like, is this something he's going to be interested in? Resources, size, location, student culture. Is he going to be able to find all those things in 15 minutes? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm going to have him prioritize. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a new tab here, and I'm going to type in University of Chicago economics. And you can see as soon as I search for this, Google feeds me back a link that is already kind of broken down for me. I have the University of Economics department here, and it already gives me some sublinks that it thinks I'm going to want to look at. Faculty, undergraduate program, economics, what that is, and the economics major. So I'm going to start by looking at the undergraduate program. The first thing you're going to see here is an overview of the program, right? What is economics? What are their goals? What do they think of? How do they think of their instruction goals for economics? And so I'm going to have the student read this a little bit. I'm going to also look at the left-hand side. This gives us a sense of what are the common resources that people need when they're looking at an economics program at a university. So here we have career planning, an honors bachelor's thesis, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. Economica, I'm not sure what that is, but I think that that's probably a research group for undergraduates. Looks like that's what it says. Research opportunities for undergraduates, student awards, and the economics major. So that's where I'm going to start here. I'm going to look on the economics major, and it breaks it down and tells me that there is a core curriculum for the economics program. There are some specific course offerings that are broken into, as they say, 4 categories. And remember, I'm just kind of skimming here. I'm not going to be able to read everything, but as I'm looking, I'm taking notes and I'm thinking, what are the things that I notice? What are the things that jump out to me? What are the things that I have questions about? When you're doing your first pass through a school website, it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. That's okay. Just write down the things that you notice. So for instance, we have 2 majors over here, a bachelor's in economics with a business specialization and a bachelor's of economics with a data science specialization. So that's maybe something that I'll write down, and maybe I'll come back and I'll look a little bit more about these in depth later. I also see, and you can see they've broken this down for me. They've given these little orange headings to make me kind of draw my eyes here. So my eyes are drawn to, okay, fundamentals, core curriculum, empirical methods. I might not know what empirical methods are if I've never heard of that before. So maybe I'd click into that and read a little bit about it later. And then of course there are some related links. Now that's a lot of material to look at, but you can see there are some institutes that goes back to the idea of affiliations and centers that I talked about, Centers for Economic Human Development, Energy Policy Institute. So all of a sudden I'm getting a sense that, oh, there's actually quite a lot of economics research at the University of Chicago. And maybe I need to come back and really do a longer, deep dive beyond my 15 minutes into the University of Chicago to really understand what are the institutes in the economics program, what does career planning look like, what are research opportunities. But you should be kind of getting a little bit of a sense of what are the things that are jumping out to me. You should see, again, they have some links down here about the economics major we're just looking at now, internships, research assistants. You can click into any of these, but remember, we're trying to keep a broad level view here. So now I've looked a little bit at the economics major. I've read this, I've read the undergraduate program, and now I'm going to look at the curriculum. So I'm going to go to University of Chicago, and I want to see, well, what is your education like for all students? I'm literally just going to type in University of Chicago curriculum. It's going to bring up the core curriculum for me here. And it's kind of going to break down, oh, interesting, they made a little video. How kind of them. So there's a video that I can watch to really think about how the University of Chicago curriculum is designed. So, oh, they say a liberal arts college. But that's fascinating. I thought the University of Chicago was a university. Even within universities, they many times will have a liberal arts view. Now, what is the liberal arts? Liberal arts is kind of a philosophy of education. It says that there should be a broad foundation of learning before you specialize. So before you go really, really, really deep into physics or computer science or economics or whatever it happens to be, there should be a foundation of thinking and discipline familiarity that will support your further study beyond. You have to do that at the undergraduate level because it's really difficult to learn writing at the graduate level or PhD level. It's really difficult to learn kind of basic humanities courses or basic mathematics if you're already in a graduate program for public policy or sociology. So now that they have this really carefully curated course about their core curriculum, I think this is something worth reading a little bit carefully, and maybe even watching the video, and maybe even taking a look at some of the courses and the course sequences and the core requirements. So there is a curriculum, it's called the core, and this is going to be really specific to the University of Chicago. It's also going to serve as a really useful reference point for me as I'm looking at other schools. Do they also have a core curriculum, or do they not? Or is their core curriculum very different? Again, as you look at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 schools, this will become more familiar. The first 2 or 3 schools may feel like you're kind of floundering a little bit, but it will get more familiar, I promise. So the other things I also want to look at here are the University of Chicago student life experience. So I'm just going to look for that again. So I'm going to go for University of Chicago, student life. And usually the first thing that pops up is, okay, literally a link about student life here. And again, it's potentially a really big website. So I'm just going to skim a little bit. So here I'm seeing some programs and events, the Dean's Fund for Student Life. So that is going to tell me about grants for student life. I have no idea what the Mergel-Funsky Fund, but it has the word fun. So I imagine it has something to do with being happy. And then study abroad. Some students are really focused on study abroad options. You're kind of, as international students, already studying abroad, but maybe that's something you want to learn a little bit about. And then you can see they have already broken down their student life into common themes for students: arts and entertainment, athletics and recreation, community service, and student organizations. You can spend 10, 15 minutes digging into each one of these if you want, but for now, you just want to know that at least they have them. And then you can see that they're going to tell you about the residential community. They're going to look at opportunities on campus for leadership, for health and wellness, politics, spiritual life. Now, these might not be things that you yourself are going to do, but it might be nice to know that there are options available, that you have the opportunity to take advantage of them, or that there are other people who are involved in those things, like politics, like spiritual life, like leadership. So maybe you yourself don't, but maybe you think it's valuable to have other people in your world also looking at those things. And then, of course, diversity and inclusion. So there's a whole section here which makes me think that the University of Chicago really is putting some attention and investment around creating a diverse and welcoming community. And of course, you can read more about that at any of these links. I want to take this opportunity to look at the main toolbar, the main menu bar. Every school has their main menu bar a little bit different. So here, the main ones are about, and usually there's going to be a drop-down section here. You can see it will drop down and tell you about, oops, sorry, clicked on it, that's okay. In the submenu, we have the undergraduate education, a message from the dean, why you should apply here, history, staff directories. Some of those things you'll be looking at, some things you won't. And then, of course, academics, the core curriculum, the different divisions, different programs of study, research and fellowship, study abroad, summer session. I think it's useful just to look at some of these drop-down menus, even if you're not necessarily going to click on all of them, just to get a sense of how do universities distribute their information. I'm going to click on advising here because I think advising is an important part of an undergraduate education. Basically, how are you getting guidance while you're an undergraduate? Who's helping you design your course curriculum? Who's helping you find resources? Who's helping you get around? So there is an entire advising department here at the University of Chicago, and you can read a little bit about it here. There are different kinds of policies, different kinds of advising, but it looks like they have an entire academic advising office. And they'll tell you a little bit about the goals for advising. Obviously, you can't schedule a meeting, but it will teach you about declaring majors and minors. So this tells me that they spend a little bit they have a good focus on making sure that students are advised carefully. And so what you can do here is begin to imagine yourself, okay, if I'm on this campus, what are the things that I noticed so far? Okay, cool, there's an economics program, and I know a little bit about the different options there. I've seen a little bit about student life, and I see some of these clubs and organizations. I've seen the core curriculum. Now at the end of kind of 15 minutes or so, you should have a kind of a gut feeling. Do I want to look more, or do I absolutely know that this school is not for me? That's kind of as good as you can get in 15 minutes. It's not going to be like absolutely 100% this school is for me, it's my number one school. For the first set of these 15-minute sprints, you're kind of just going to get like a vibe, right? A feeling. You're not necessarily going to have, sometimes it will be like, no, I don't think so, in which case you don't have to keep looking at them. And sometimes it'll be like, yeah, I think so. But usually you're going to have to come back and look at these schools. I should say that one of the reasons it's really useful to take your time doing this school research is many schools will ask you why you're applying to them. And if you've done your due diligence, if you've researched really carefully and understood schools really carefully, then you'll be able to answer that why essay better, right? More deeply. Remember, a why essay is asked to every student. So the deeper, more specific you can go, the more differentiated you will be in your application, or to that school at least. The other thing I want to look at really quickly is I want to show you what a virtual tour looks like. So I'm going to go to the University of Chicago, virtual tour, and you can see Google is kind of like auto-filling a lot of these for me because it knows that a lot of students are looking for these kinds of things. So before I click on this, you can also see that there are also some individual YouTube videos that have been put up, some by the University of Chicago, some by individuals. So you can kind of take a look of like what the campus is. So here in the background, you can see there's some snow. No, snow? No snow, just kidding. So we're going to do the University of Chicago virtual tour really quickly. And this is one of the ways that it potentially looks. It's going to show up for me, so you're not going to be able to hear any of the background, I don't think. So I'm going to click on some of these dots, and you can see that as soon as I click on dots, it pops up a video for me. So you can see that the University of Chicago has taken a lot of time to design and try to give as much of an experience to someone standing far away to try and understand what, and by standing far away, of course, I mean living far away, to understand what it might look like on campus. So if I click on any one of these, I'm going to get a video, and I'm going to get potentially pictures that I can scroll through, and I'm going to also get some information that I can read about, or I can just watch the video, right? So this is the Institute of Politics. Here's the botany pond. Botany, of course, having to do a little bit with the study of botany. And I can read some pictures here. I'm assuming there's going to be some really lovely plants, some information, the main quadrangle. We're going to do some pics here. We got a nice little sunny field situation going on. We got some museums. So I'm looking a little bit for architecture. I'm looking a little bit for how beautiful it is. I'm looking, ooh, this is pretty. A lot of people, University of Chicago is kind of like the Hogwarts school. It like for sure looks like Hogwarts. Let me show you University of Chicago really quickly. Look at some pictures. I went on a campus tour of University of Chicago last year, and it's just like a super beautiful campus, right? Like, look at that. How is that not Hogwarts, right? Wild. So I think these virtual tours can be a really good way of, again, getting familiar with like, what does a campus look like? What are the different areas? So this is the library, and take some time, watch some of these videos. I think they're usually really well done, and they can give you a lot of information. In addition to that, there's obviously things like the University of Chicago Instagram. And I think if I remember correctly, a lot of those, a lot of those links are down at the bottom. So really anywhere on a school website, if you scroll all the way down, there will be ways for you to connect. So we have a little bit of a Facebook group, we have Twitter, if that's your thing, Instagram, and then of course there's a YouTube channel that's going to be dedicated to just the University of Chicago. Here, there are going to be things like lectures you can watch. Sometimes there's some really great lectures that you can just enjoy, like what's it like to sit in a class from this professor. So they have this broken down, and I would recommend watching as many of these as you want. Again, that gets well beyond the 15-minute sprint, but it could give you an idea of what it might be like to sit in class, what kind of events, what kind of speakers, what kind of lectures does this school look at. I'm going to pause there and go back to our slideshow so we can finish up here. What are some things that I want you to notice as you're looking, right? So the first thing is that there are more majors than you can imagine. I didn't show you just the main academic program list, and maybe I'll go back in a moment, but there are not 10 or 15 majors in universities. There are like 70, 80, 100. Sometimes there are more, depending on how big the school is. And by majors, I mean like, again, an economics department can have 6 economics majors that focus on different things. Maybe there's only one economics major, maybe there's many. That depends on the school. So you got to really take your time and look through the academic sections really, really carefully. And even within a discipline, schools can take very, very different approaches to a single subject. Economics and computer science can be taught very, very differently. English can be taught very, very differently. So as you begin to look at 1, 2, 3, 15 schools, you want to compare, okay, what am I noticing about the way they teach their English program? What am I noticing about the way that they teach their economics program? So you can kind of get a little bit of a vibe. Also, what are the kinds of things that, what's kind of research are professors working on? Are those things that you know you're interested in? Now, you might not have thought at all about research. You might have been like, I'm considering math or economics, and you're at that level. Or you might think, I'm really interested in regenerative science and reconstructive medicine. And so maybe you'll look at professors who are doing that kind of research at some of their medical programs. What kind of events, what kind of speakers, what kind of workshops does the school host? What does the school say about itself and its materials? As you're looking through its about section and its mission statement and its values and its history, how does the school think about itself? What does it think its mission is? And does that align a little bit with your values? You saw all schools have an about section. And then there's this kind of qualitative thing called, what did you notice about their vibe? That can be really tricky to pick up when you're not there, but that's why we're doing the virtual tours. That's why we're looking at social media. That's why we're looking at videos, is to kind of begin to try to immerse yourself in the vibe of the schools as much as you can. Now we're going to start, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the resources that you have for how to look at schools, how to find schools that you haven't seen before or maybe haven't heard of if you're like starting from scratch. The number one best places from working with a coach or working with a counselor. People who have gone through this process a lot know which schools have which strengths and which schools don't, and which schools have really unique programs. That's going to be the most efficient way to find school programs to look at. Big Future is a college search database from the College Board. That's the same organization that runs the SAT. So you just go to Big Future College Board and you'll find a school search database that you can focus by size and major and SAT scores. You can narrow your search. Naviance or Cialfo or Maya Learning, if your school has those things. Your school might not have them. If they don't, then this doesn't apply to you. Those all have search functions. The Common Application also has search functions, although albeit not great ones, but that is a way that you can narrow some schools by location. Colleges That Change Lives is a website that assesses schools based on student experience and outcome. Students who said that after they graduated, they were happier, or that they were fulfilled, or they focus on creating good lives, changed lives. The Compass Prep Report is one of the tools that I use for, it looks like this. You can literally just go to Compass Press Compass Guide, and I'll download it really quickly. This is how you find the difference between, or find schools' SAT ranges. Let me show you really quickly. So when I'm looking for school SATs, I'm looking here, right? Here's what we call the competitive landscape. If you're looking at different schools and you need to know what their SAT ranges are, all this data is here. All of this data is pulled from something called the common data set. Every school, every year, publishes their statistics. So you can literally just Google school name, common data set, and then it's just like pages and pages of information. It's not particularly designed well, but Compass Prep has formatted that in a really beautiful way. They publish it every year, and it's based on statistics. So there you have the admissions rates and the SAT ranges for the SAT and the ACT. So that can be a good way of getting some additional information. And then of course your good friend Google. Really, usually any questions that you might have, pop those things into Google, and Google usually can be a good place to start. You'll see down below here I have a little U.S. News and World Report. Not something that we use, mostly because they're not very reliable. Now, I'm just going to touch briefly on financial aid. This is a document that we will send to everybody. This is compiled by the International Association for College Admissions Counselors, and it lists financial aid for non-resident students. And non-residents are international students, people who do not have a green card and are not permanent residents of the United States. The most important thing you want to look at is the number of residents who are receiving aid and the average aid award for schools. So if they don't have any average aid, that usually means they're not offering international students financial aid. If there are only 30% and the range is very low, usually that means you're not getting much money at all. You want to be looking for schools that have a very high percentage. Again, if you are a student who needs financial aid and a average high award list. Of course, as I mentioned, if you cannot apply for financial aid, that will improve your chances a little bit, but that's not something we really can get into too much. All right, I'm going to shift over to questions here. And again, I will direct your attention to the chat window, which I will open up here. I'm going to, let's see, Chiha, Sa, and Ming Chang, and Zoe, if you guys want to unmute yourself and help facilitate, you're welcome to. We'll go maybe like another 5 minutes. We'll go until 5 minutes past the hour since we got started a little bit late. So I have the chat window, and feel free to ask me any questions in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. Previously, let's see if I can remember some of the questions that people, I tried to weave as many of the questions that, that I got from our survey into this talk, but if I didn't answer any of your questions, then I can, please let me know. I will wait and see if any questions pop up in the chat. Or Sa and Ming Chang or Zoe, if there are any questions that that you remember that you feel like I hadn't touched on that you think are really important for me to discuss, then I'm happy to do that. You can either throw those in the chat.
One of the questions that we received was, are there any significant differences between the education quality of public and private schools? Can you?
Good question. Yeah. So the only difference between a public and a private school is literally that they're owned publicly or owned privately. Public schools are different. Every states are the ones who own public schools. There are 50 different states, more than 50 different public colleges. Each state has its own public education system. And so you can't really actually compare between public education and private education. There are some absolutely top tier public institutions. The University of California system at San Francisco is one of the best medical schools in the country. UCLA and UC Berkeley are two of the top colleges and universities in the country. And there are some private colleges that are not that great. Liberty University comes to mind, owned by the current president of the United States. Not such a great question, not such a great school. So there is no, you cannot assess quality of education based on whether it is a public school or a private school. Another question, are there any significant differences? Oh, sorry. What should I do to find the field that I can do best? That's a tricky question. The best answer there is actually to work with a coach and someone who can help walk you through what your strengths are, help introduce you to different fields that maybe you have never thought about before. There are many kind of like tests that you can kind of take online, pre-professional tests, career tests. That might be a place to start. But really working with a mentor, I think, is the best way to find out a field that you might be strong in. Okay, we have another question from Nguyen. Hi, I'm a junior enrolling in Washington at WA in Massachusetts. As a school year might be postponed, what should I do to develop myself? Extracurricular, of course, maybe. Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't think I understand that question. Junior enrolling. Okay, I'm gonna move on to a different question. Okay, cool. Another one that we received is, could you give me some tips about making an interesting essay? We're not going to talk about essay work in this class. That's a different workshop and kind of very long one. So we're not going to talk about essays here, but stay tuned for other Spark Prep workshops. We'll be talking about essays at another date. Another question, what clubs and extracurricular activities should I take part in regarding my intended major, chemistry and biology? Good question. There are a couple of answers to that. The first one is all of the ones that are exciting to you. So the should question is a tricky one. As long as you're learning, as long as you're growing, you're kind of in good shape. Now, what are some of the options there? Some of the options include individual research. Some of the options include service. Some of the options include additional coursework. Some of those options include camps. some of those, there's many different ways that you can extend your learning. But the goal of all of those programs is going to be two things. One, increasing your skill level and your expertise in that subject, science and chemistry perhaps, and two, developing your interpersonal skills, working with others, developing research skills, familiarizing yourself with the range of like how that is experienced in scholarship and academic broadly, right? So deepening your understanding of subfields. We live in a wonderful time where there's literally hundreds of online courses. You can always start there, or you can work with friends and build clubs, or you can do some tutoring, or you can do some research. Lots and lots of ways you can do that. Another question is, where can I get the most objective reviews of the university? So by definition, there's no such thing as an objective review because all reviews are subjective. I think you're asking where are there, I guess, good reviews of schools? You can't, honestly. I think the way that I would suggest that is get subjective reviews that you trust. So rather than getting subjective reviews from Reddit or from College Confidential or from Niche, get subjective reviews from people who you have an understanding of, and you trust their opinion, you trust their perspective, their experiences, but you can't really get objective reviews. I think you're talking about quality of education here, and again, you want to be talking to coaches and counselors to get a sense of the quality of education. Now, I think this is something we have to, I think, mention, right? Colleges want you to apply there, and colleges want you to enroll there. So it is in a college's interest to make it difficult for you to find objective reviews because they want to be the ones giving you an impression. That's why they've designed their websites. That's why they have social media. That's why they have blogs, all that stuff. You can think about all of that as kind of marketing material. Websites, social media, blogs, all kind of marketing material. So just take all of the perspectives that you're getting with a grain of salt and always cycle it back to your own particular goals and your own particular interests. That's as good as you're going to be able to, I think, do without kind of wading into territory of subjective reviews like the kinds that you're going to find online. Every journal, like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Huffington Post, will kind of like write profiles of schools every year. Again, they're not objective, they are subjective. You can see a little bit about how people think about them and the different things people are saying as a baseline, but I wouldn't take them as gospel. One of the things that students have a hard time kind of believing is that there is no ranking system in the United States. There's no official ranking system. There are many dozens of private ranking systems that are sold, but there's no official ranking system, and you just kind of got to accept that that's the case. Another question, what is the difference between early decision and early action? Really good question. The main difference between early decision and early action is that early decision is a binding agreement. If you apply early decision and you are admitted, you have to go. You cannot go to any other school. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off. Usually the likelihood of being admitted early decision is a little bit higher, but you only apply early decision if you are willing to sacrifice choice later on. Early action is just finding out earlier, right? It's just a way of applying earlier and getting the results a little bit earlier. Broadly speaking, there are kind of two rounds of applications, the early round of applications and the regular round of applications. Regular usually starts around January 1st and goes, that's the deadline. Every school usually has their own deadline. Usually they're January 1st, January 15th, February 1st, February 15th, kind of like that. Early deadlines usually are always November 1st, sometimes November 15th. The main difference there, early decision, binding, you make a promise, they make a promise. Early action, not binding. Let's see, let me read. I'm going to take one more question. Okay, here's a good question. I have heard of many pre-college programs offered by universities and colleges. Do you think that these programs are worth attending in order to better prepare for college? Good question. To be honest, these programs oftentimes are great, and they're a way for colleges to make money. They're very, very expensive, almost always very expensive. They differ very broadly. Brown's pre-college program, Stanford's pre-college program, Harvard's pre-college program, all very different. Some of them are in fact college level courses and will give you college credit. And if they give you college credit, then it's a good opportunity for you to see what college level courses are like, but you also have to be careful because it might be too much. So you want to choose those things carefully. You want to read about the programs carefully. Colleges have started offering these programs as a way to leverage their brand position and basically make more money. So the first answer is they're a way for colleges to make money. The second answer is some of them are very good. Some of them are not that great. Another question is, are school ranking websites reliable? I'm not sure what reliable means necessarily. I'm going to say no-ish. You will often see the same schools appearing on many different ranking websites. The problem is that, so here's a comment on ranking. The problem is that rankings are opt-in. If you are a college and you don't want to participate in the ranking system, a website won't include you, but you might be a phenomenal college. A really great example is Reed College has every year said, we don't really want to participate in this. We don't want to give you all the information that you're looking for, but everybody knows in the United States that Reed College is an excellent college, but you won't find them in many of the rankings. You will find them on colleges that change lives. So I understand that people go to rankings as a way to find schools that are quote unquote good, but they are all subjective and they are all opt-in. A school has to agree to participate in them for them to show up on any of the rankings. Okay. I think we're going to pause there. I know I didn't get a chance to get to everyone's questions. Thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Again, I hope you're all taking good care. If you have additional follow-up questions, if you'd like to find out more about Spark Prep's admissions coaching programs, please reach out to Zoe or Sa or anyone here at Spark Prep, and they can tell you a little bit more about our program. Ming Chang just posted in the chat window a survey that we would love for you to take. It's also an opportunity for you to hear about more kind of webinars like this that we're going to be hosting in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be hosting SAT classes online. We're going to be hosting college application boot classes online. We're going to be hosting college essay writing classes. So make sure that you fill out the survey here so that you can stay informed. And then you can also email Zoe at sparkprep.com. That's ZOEY at sparkprep.com to learn more about the college application process and Spark Prep's admissions program. I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me, and we'll look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Take care.